Welcome to the PR Resolution podcast. In this episode, I interview PR measurement heavyweights, Richard Bagnall and Darryl Sparey. It's about their latest joint research project on the effects that PR can have on technology startup businesses, attracting investors and the funding that they can gain. It's a really interesting episode, though, because not only do we delve into the research and the type of businesses that this works for, we also explore the approaches that PR needs and specifically the impacts that a CEO or founder can have in this process just by having a presence on social media. So one to watch there. But the conversation goes on and it really is fascinating talking to the two of them, because not just is it about the correlation between PR and funding, but because Darryl and Richard both together have so much experience in measurement, but also this kind of PR reputation work. Darryl, if you don't know, is the MD and co-founder of performance-driven marketing and comms consultancy Hard Numbers. And Richard, I'm sure many of you know, but he's the co-managing partner of the evaluation firm CARMA. He's also been awarded loads of awards, including CIPR medals for his service to PR, the AMEC Don Bartholomew Award, and of course, he was the AMEC chair between 2016 and 2022 as well. He really is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on PR measurement in the world. So we really do gain some of that wisdom in this episode. So we cover the detail of the research. So we get into the 64 startups that they analysed, which are unicorn businesses, and also the 65,000 pieces of coverage and social mentions as well to find their correlations. We look at the sectors that do well out of this and which ones can gain more potential funding. Darryl also shares his tips on how to best work with those senior members of staff and CEOs and how to get the most from this kind of work. I also do a bit of challenging on around the correlation versus causation effects around the results of this research. But we really do get some great responses from that and hear the wisdom from on PR measurement from Richard. So without further ado, here is Richard and Darryl. We are talking about coverage to Captial, the research that you guys teamed up on, and really keen to just get straight into it. So could you tell us why CARMA and Hard Numbers teamed up together to look at this piece of research?
Darryl is a friend, but also a long-time competitor of mine in the industry. Many years ago, when we wore different hats, we were fierce competitors. That all ended about 8 years ago, I guess, when both of our businesses in separate transactions got sold. And when the fierce competition dropped away, we realized actually how much in common we had. And, really proud to say that today Darryl's a good friend. And Darryl's created a business in Hard Numbers, a PR agency, which is exactly the type of business that if I was a PR and comms guru myself, I would be looking to do it. So it's a PR agency that's all focused about measuring the effectiveness of comms in a meaningful way. And those of you who've heard me speak with my AMEC hat on or with my CARMA hat on will know that measuring PR in a meaningful way is the biggest challenge I think that the industry faces at the moment. It's not just about just counting anything. It's about really trying to link it through to the objectives of organizations that we work for and the outcomes. Darryl will say some words, I'm sure, in a second himself, but that's what attracts us as a business to working with Darryl and supporting him on initiatives like this. It's the second report that we've done with him. That's why we like working with Darryl, because he's all about those hard numbers that tell that meaningful story.
Yeah, Darryl, can you tell us a bit more about this piece of research, specifically why you wanted to look at this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we started Hard Numbers, we did so in part on a foundational belief that you can, should, and must demonstrate a link between the activity that you undertake as a PR, communications, or marketing professional and an outcome that matters to the client, ultimately. And we really believe that a great way to do it and a great way to demonstrate a real link between activity and outcome was around funding for businesses. So the first report that we did with the guys at CARMA was looking at companies that went from Series A to Series B over an 18-month period. And we identified that the companies that had the biggest increase between their Series A and their Series B capital raise also generated the most media coverage over that period of the time. And that was great for Hard Numbers as a piece of kind of thought leadership content. It was very attuned to the audience that we were trying to engage with. Earlier stage, high growth businesses are very much the kind of Hard Numbers audience. But it wasn't necessarily brilliant for Richard and for CARMA's pipeline, because they're more used to dealing with more mature businesses that invest more money in things like reputation, measurement and management and things like that. I really wanted to work with CARMA again on this because they add research credibility to our work and a rigor and data that I think is second to none. And also they're a great business to work with. And so we wanted to do it again, but we wanted to do it on an audience that might be more aligned to the kind of audience that Richard might want to outreach. So we picked unicorns, and there's some disagreement between me and other people about how you define a unicorn, but I define a unicorn as a publicly held business with a valuation in excess of $1 billion. So we did some research and identified 64 unicorns that were headquartered in the UK. And that was the basis of the research that we then undertook to try to do the same thing. So who'd raised the most money, and was there a relationship between the media coverage and their profile as a business, and importantly, the profiles of their founders or CEOs? And was there any kind of correlation between the two? So that was the genesis of the report.
So we did the research between May 21 and April 22. Darryl mentioned we researched 64 unicorn companies based in the UK. We looked across we did a back search on CARMA's database of media content, sifted through over 3,200 different sources, looking for keywords using tech, big data type technologies to get in there. We found over 65,000 pieces of content that were relevant. We looked on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. For LinkedIn, we looked at 6 months worth of coverage. For Twitter, we looked at 1 month's worth of coverage to get representative samples. Found over 10,000 posts from these organizations and their CEOs or founders as well. So we used automation technology, the great tech that CARMA has, but then we blended it with our experienced account teams as well to pass an eye over it, to bring that critical thinking, the human judgment, to make sure that the content was relevant, filter out stuff that was noise and not meaningful articles. As we all know, if you just run automation over massive data sets, you get back a lot of junk. So to clean that data and do some coding on it as well. So that's the sort of methodology behind the report.
Research sounds very thorough and lots of data points that you can analyze. What were the correlations that you were looking at, Darryl, once you got that sort of data back on the coverage? What were the data points that were really standing out?
Two big things were, we bucketed up the unicorns into 3 cohorts, the one that raised the most money, and then a mid-tier, and then the tier of unicorns that raised the smallest amount of capital. And we saw very clearly that there was a correlation between the ones that had generated the most money and the profile of their C-suite, their CEO or founder. And then the other thing that we looked at, as Richard, alluded to, was on LinkedIn and Twitter. And we did a comparison between the following that the founder or CEOs of the businesses had on their own personal channels on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then we benchmarked those against the companies, their own companies that they represented. And again, we found that the unicorn companies with the founders that had the largest number of LinkedIn followers secured over 763 million in total investment on average. And that was over 20% more than the average raised by the remainder of that unicorn cohort. So that compares to 632 million on average that was raised by the rest. And we saw something similar on Twitter as well, again, where those that were investing in building their own audience on that channel, the top 20% of those CEOs again had raised more money than the remainder of the CEOs. Admittedly, there was a smaller difference between the two on Twitter that we noticed, but there was, again, a really strong correlation there.
Interesting. So the social profiles are really important. Did you find the same with sort of media profiles, and what kind of coverage were the C-suite needing to get this kind of the coverage that was making a difference?
So, well, we trawled across all of the content that's publicly available. So the content that wasn't behind paywalls, I think that's an important thing to say. So if there was a key financial press that's behind a paywall, then we weren't looking at that. But we're looking at, because it was this back search across a year's worth of data, it was stuff that's on the web. I think 5 additional key tier 1 media were categorized as well. What I think is pretty clear is that it's all about the right type of content in the right type of media is going to have the right effect for anybody. I mean, the more that PR and comms has changed, the more it's stayed the same. It's about getting your right messages to the right people to achieve an objective. And you get to the right people by going to the media that they read. So we looked across business press, tech press, finance press. We broke down by all the different sectors. But I think it's pretty obvious that where the audience was the right place for them to go. There was some interesting things that came out there. I think although the mixture between B2B and B2C unicorns was about 50%, so in that total of 64 startup unicorns, it's about half and half with B2B or B2C. We found that B2C got by far the most coverage. I think it was up near 83% of the coverage was focused around B2C. And then when you look at the actual sectors, I thought there was some really interesting stuff in the data as well. So the retail sector, which represents 14% of the unicorns as a cohort, that got the most coverage with 44%, but it only received 4% of the total funding pile. The financial sector, so, the sort of famous organizations that people would think of, so people like Revolut or Starling Bank, they received the most investment, but only the second highest amount of coverage. So they got 32% of the total amount of coverage. And I thought for us data wonks, a really nice and interesting stat was that in third place was data and analytics focused unicorns. Now, they got the least coverage with just 1% of it, and they only represented 6% of the unicorns, but they received the second highest amount of investment total. So obviously it's a hot sector, and they're a strong area of investment and interest from different investing vehicles.
And did the coverage tend to be about the company leads, CEOs, C-suites, or were they more ever generally about the company? Like you mentioned Revolut there, but you also mentioned data businesses. Did they use data to get stories, or did it really just focus on the heads of the businesses?
I think it's fair to say it was a blend of both. I mean, sometimes the story obviously is how the business is performing, how it's growing, how it's seeding in its attempts to raise capital and to continue to grow. In other cases, it is about the sort of the hero CEO or whatever and their story. And we call it out in the report, and there's a lot of analytics and data and detail on those CEOs there to be looked at.
I think just to build on what Richard said there, and he's absolutely right. When you look at those top tier unicorns, the ones that raise the most money with an average of £1.4 billion, their CEOs were featured on average 23% of the time within their media coverage. Whereas when you look at the next 2 tiers of unicorns, it was 13 and 14%, respectively. Okay. So what I think that speaks to, again, on the earned media side of things, as well as the kind of social media side of things that I made reference to earlier, it's all about that CEO, founder story and being willing to step up to the plate and be front and center in driving the media profile, for those businesses. That has a positive knock-on effect on the money that they're able to raise. Sorry, Richard.
Well, there's a nice term that I think your team used in the final report, which is about their ability to bring the future forward. And I think their ability to talk about what it is that they, their vision, and to make their vision a reality is something that the media particularly like to pick up on as well.
You can see here from the numbers that the correlation is strong. Is there anything more than correlation with any of this where we can actually prove, hard question, but that's what we're trying to get to in measurement. Would they have got the funding anyway?
It's a great question, Stella. And I think we are at pains to say, I think more in this report than we were in the first report as well, that this is correlation, not direct causation, right? So there's a strong correlation between these two numbers. I think what is definitely really you see, and it's borne out in both research reports that we've done now with CARMA and borne out through the work that we do with our clients on a daily basis, is that if you have a CEO or founder who is not just willing to be and has a desire to put themselves front and center in terms of, generating media coverage and investing the time and effort in building their own media profile on earned media and on social media and things like that, but also is able to demonstrate genuine thought, industry and category leadership, that they really understand the market in which they operate and they have something genuinely differentiated, not just to say about that market, but actually about what they're able to offer to that market in terms of a product or a service. Then that's the thing that is incredibly catalyzing, not just for media, not just for customers, but also for investors. That's what they're looking for.
Just thinking about measurement generally, and on the point of correlation, I've found it's been really, really useful recently, looking at coverage over time and looking at different data points that might pop up. But then we are getting better as an industry of getting to some of those proof points, whether it might be direct sales, but you can't always have both. Just sort of stepping away as a general sort of measurement, what do you believe the perfect balance of having sort of correlation, but then also having direct sort of proof points to business?
There's a lot to unpack in what you've just said. The two most common words that I use in my career have been it depends, right? You talk about, can you link to direct sales? Well, not if your job is to build reputation. It's not going to be easily linked through to direct sales. So it's literally going to depend on what our different objectives are. You're absolutely right to call out correlation. Darryl's right to call out the correlation does not equal causation. We won a big new client about 3-4 weeks ago. I had a meeting with them last week and I said, your share price has gone up since the day you appointed us by 20%. There is an example of obvious causation as opposed to correlation.
There's a ward entry right there.
There you go. We didn't even have to do anything. It's just the goodwill that was generated with our appointment. But look, because correlation doesn't equal causation, there are other ways that you can look to try to do it. And there are techniques that have existed for years, things like econometrics, market mix modeling. They very quickly get very complicated and they get very expensive as well. The world has got ever more complicated. We're on the cusp of a generative AI content explosion. I mean, we thought we were already in that content explosion. It's going to, 10x, 100x, 1000x again. And to try and unpick that, to actually work out exactly what it is that caused a human to do something and buy or whatever a product, invest in a product, whatever it might be, is going to get incredibly complicated. So when I'm talking to people, I'm privileged to have been on the Cabinet Office Strategy and Evaluation Council for the last 10 years. We've talked about this a lot. If you're looking at government communications, there's an onus to try and demonstrate the value that you've created. Should this go beyond correlation? Should we be doing econometrics, market mix modeling to look at the actual value that we're doing? And there has to be this balance between benefit that you get, accuracy of data and cost. And the perspective that I advise people is that you don't need to do it at all. What you do need to do is correlate the data, use critical thinking, tell a measurement story, and show the right data points from the outputs that we generate to what the audience that we've tried to reach, the stakeholders we try to reach, what they now think and what they've now done. Pull those things together and say with a certain degree of confidence, the data suggests that what we've done here has had an effect there. That's a very cost-effective and easy to do thing. And my perspective is that is good enough.
This podcast is brought to you by Coverage Book, the tool that creates beautifully designed reports with credible metrics you can be proud of. Head to coveragebook.com for your free trial. Reputation is obviously really key for what we're talking about. What are some of you said that you were looking at keywords in some of the searches. Where would people start if they needed to measure reputation management or improving reputation for their organization? What are some of the first steps in setting out on a measurement process like that?
Yeah. Well, I would always say the first thing to do is to turn to our industry trade body, of which the three of us are all members, which is AMEC, so the International Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. And AMEC's done a lot of work to educate and support the industry, and AMEC does it for free. Within the work that AMEC does, there is something called the Integrated Evaluation Framework, or the IEF, which is a whole microsite on AMEC's website, and it links to an enormous body of evidence and research as a library of useful resources. And within there will be white papers on measuring reputation and trust, which I think really go very much hand in hand, and of course, which matter more now than ever. You know, the latest Edelman Trust Barometer came out not that long ago and was saying that and was saying that was suggesting that the only trusted channel now is basically the organization. Even, the media, governments, all of this lot have all lost their trust. It comes through in data from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism that right across the world, people are losing trust in the media. So measuring reputation matters more than ever. So there you have to look at what are the drivers of reputation for any organization. And that's a number of different dynamics that work across, a number of different vectors, if you like. So leadership, vision, behavior, performance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I'd suggest to the viewers and the listeners is to think about what are the drivers of the reputation of the organization that they work at, and to think of it like an airplane cockpit, if you like. So don't try and get a singular number necessarily that just is a single reputation score, because I think it's largely meaningless apart from giving you a broad direction of travel, but it doesn't help you unpack it to understand what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. What you want to do is create a dashboard of appropriate metrics, all bucketed under reputation on the things that matter to your organization, and then to measure them. And I would recommend that you measure them both in the media, both in terms of how people talk about it on social, how people look for it on search, and then as long as your budgets also can afford it as well, then to take that through to what people actually say when you ask them with research, and to pull those things together. But when we all know that, what they say, reputation arrives on foot and departs on horseback, reputation matters so much in today's world, which is so combustible. I think it's more important than ever that PR and comms pros look at it, but tailor it to your organization, do some research, refer to the bodies of best practice in terms of getting some guidance, and start to measure it. That's what I'd suggest.
Just a quick point on, you mentioned reputation in search there, which I know that I've had past experience in from
absolutely
old PR SEO days. It was a very important part of our work. Was that included in the research, or was it not possible because it was past articles? Had the search results changed by the time you'd done the research?
Yeah, so we didn't look at share of search or anything like that for this specific piece, but I think it's something that I think we've spoken about before, and I'm a big advocate for. Back in my days in where I was competing directly with Richard, which he made reference to earlier, I was a big advocate. Long time ago now. We're best of friends as ever we were now, but I was a big advocate for looking at share of search and believing really that for the majority of businesses out there, the PR team should position themselves as the custodian of branded search. Because if you think about, for most businesses out there, I'm not talking about your Nikes or your Bosches or your major household brands or something, but for the majority of businesses out there, the primary way that you create brand awareness and that you create brand affinity in comparison to your competitors is through PR, or through the investment that you're making in an external PR agency or your own in-house efforts and things like that. And so I believe for the vast majority of people that are, interested in this and that do this stuff for a living should really be making the case for, right, okay, let the SEO guys own generic, and best of luck with that, right? Because it's high for things like air fryers or trainers or little black dresses or anything like that. It's highly competitive, or car insurance, or you name the category, right? But the PR team should try to make the case for, let's own branded search and let's be the custodian of that. Let's measure that. Let's, to Richard's point, let's not just measure it in and of ourselves, because that doesn't tell us a lot. But when we measure branded search in comparison to our competitor set and look across our category or our sector or our industry and say, how do we compare relative to our peers? Then you start getting some really, really interesting, really, really valuable data. And then you start moving yourself closer ultimately to the money, right?
Yeah.
And we all know from work that we've all done previously that if you want to get budget for something, get as close as you can to a financial outcome for the business in one way or another, whether that's raising capital, whether that's selling more product, whether that's, whatever, which hopefully the report kind of spoke to, right?
I'll just add to that as well, just for tips for listeners, if they are doing profile pieces around C-suite, CEOs, leads of the business, then to check the search profiles around their names as well. It's an important one to look after.
100%. Actually, I've got a very quick story on that, actually, for you.
I hope it's not one to do with any of our past projects. What I used to do.
And I will anonymize.
We're not allowed to talk about them.
Yeah. I will anonymize this, and I'll just talk generally about the category. But one of the biggest pieces of work that I won when I was in the SEO industry, I spent a period of time in the SEO industry after my period in the media intelligence industry, was an online reputation management piece that started when the CEO of a utility company's wife Googled his name and found him appearing in lots and lots of negative stuff that third-party activist groups had put together, and lots of sort of websites saying lots of negative things about this CEO. And so she then got in touch with the CEO and said, you've got to do something about this. And he had no idea about this, no awareness of this. But amazingly, for a CEO, he'd not Googled his name in the last 20 minutes. And he came to us initially with that brief, like, can you do something about this? But then that turned into a much bigger online reputation management piece for the business. And then also creating, good, high quality, well put together and well linked to assets that would outrank some of the kind of negative stuff that was being put online about him. So yeah, Googling yourself, it would turn out, is no bad thing.
Yeah. I've worked on a few projects like that, one of them being for a huge business that was just about to announce their financial results, and there was a couple of negative stories about the CEO that we needed to turn around. But it makes a massive difference. It's only PR people that can do that. So confidence in search with that. Darryl, question for you, just looking at the client side, we do have listeners in-house as well as in agencies for this podcast. When does it become important to start to look at this? So we know that if you are just launching a business, budgets are tight. When should people start to think about their profile, their reputation, and starting to look into PR?
It's a great question. I love Richard's consultant's answer of it depends. I'm not going to give that. I'm also not going to give the kind of cheerleader, talking my own book thing of right away, Stella, right away. I mean, I think what is important, what the research I think really speaks to is that, and I know as someone who is a founder of a business a couple of times over, that it's hard to make the time for this stuff, right? But if you make the time to build your own thought leadership platform through and you have the tools to do it through LinkedIn and Twitter primarily, particularly if you're, because it's a B2B, those are B2B platforms. And which is more, particularly LinkedIn's algorithm. I've spent a lot of time, I've written a paper on how LinkedIn's algorithm works. I do a session for all our new clients on social selling and how LinkedIn's algorithm works and things like that. It's a thought leadership platform that is biased towards individuals over company pages. We've all seen instances where, our feeds are like 80% other people and like 20% or less company pages, right? So we know that algorithm biases, right, posts from people over posts from companies. So it's in our own interests to invest the time and effort in building our profiles on these platforms, because we know the algorithm has a bias towards this stuff. Also, it's the same with Twitter. We know from research on Twitter that people are more likely to engage, like, retweet posts with someone with a face than with a company with a logo or an image, right? Again, right? So we know that the algorithms that drive all of people's access to this stuff and then make more people likely to see this stuff and therefore then, comment and engage with this stuff are driven around personal profiles. So I would encourage any CEO or founder of a business to get started on that piece as early as they're able to. But then over time, obviously, when you can make the budget, make the business case for investing in PR, use your PR agency to help support that, maybe help create content to kind of feed that, but also help you have a really, really strong thought leadership and byline game that's going to deliver those kind of earned media profile stuff that Richard was making reference to earlier. And then that's the thing that's when you see this stuff really taking off like a rocket ship. Once you have that kind of earned media veracity aligned to reach and scale that you can get from social media, that's when we see all these things take off.
Can I just build on something from the report? Because that's absolutely right and so important what Darryl said. But what the report showed was that despite what Darryl said, the CEOs average on LinkedIn are posting about 2.3 times on average a month, whereas their organization handle was posting basically every other day, about 16 times a month. So I think an insight that comes out of, Darryl's perspective there and what's actually happening is that perhaps that balance should be shifted a bit because, as he says, none of us want to listen to a brand telling us what to do, but we all want to hear people's perspectives. And maybe that would be an insight that would come out of the report that could help those CEOs as they go on that journey.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess when they come to realizing that they need PR, reputation management work, they're probably going into a busy period with their business. And this sounds like it might take up a lot of their time. How important is it that it's them who are doing the interviews, the writing? How much can you help a CEO with not this, this kind of thing taking up all of their time and they're about to go for funding or change their business or double in size, which might be taking up a lot of their time?
I think with media, it always helps to have the most senior person possible, the person that really represents the business as possible. But, we have instances for a number of our clients that are international businesses, that are primarily businesses that have come over to Europe from the US. And they start by building out their European operations from the UK. And they have country managers or country leads or, things like that. And those are the ones that we're having to profile to the local media because they're available at a time which is convenient to local media. And for that local media, they represent the voice and face of the business. So, and our best relationships and where we see the most success is where I used to work with a great guy, Greg Monshine, who's been tremendously successful with his own PR business called Source Code Communications. And Greg and Becky were inspirations to me when we set up Hard Numbers. And if we can be half as successful as they are, I'll be very happy indeed. But he used to say, get to text, right? If you want to successfully build a relationship with anyone about anything, get to the point where you can send them a text message about something. Because that's my least cluttered inbox is my text messages, right? Not WhatsApp. I mean, your actual text messages, right? The only people that text me are my mum in all caps, right? Papa John's, right? and my missus when there's an emergency with the kids, right? That's it. Every other inbox I've got is absolutely flooded, but my text message inbox, right? So with our clients, we have the best relationships where we can text them and say, got this up with, BBC, can you be ready by 4:00 today to talk about X? We'll send you a briefing document. And then they can give us an answer very quickly, yes or no, about whether it's go or no go. And if it's go, then we can help manage everything else around it to make them as well briefed and as successful as they possibly can be. But getting to text and being able to text your clients quickly so that they can respond at the speed of media is one of the keys to success, I think.
Just thinking about the PR teams who are listening to this and thinking, I place profile pieces. I think that maybe we could, my team are really good at that. Maybe we could be selling our services better. And I know this is tricky, Darryl, because they are probably your competitors slightly. But in measurement, joined on to that point, in measurement, it's all about trying to get the clearest objective possible. Do you think that we should be clearer as PR teams to say, we will take you to IPO, we will get your next series of funding? Like, do you think that we should be stronger in what we're going to achieve to be able to get that clear measurement objective? Or is that too ambitious?
I mean, I'll talk about it from the PR side of things, and then Richard could talk about it from the importance of clear objectives from a measurement perspective afterwards, if you like. But yeah, 100%. I had the garden office that I'm sat in right now built just before Christmas, and I commissioned it like in April or something, and like shovels didn't go in the ground until July, I think, and it wasn't finished until like, I don't know, 6-8 weeks later or something like that, right? So it took time. And I had to pay 25% or something up front for that, and then 50% more before the thing was even finished or whatever. But I had a cast iron guarantee from the person that built my garden office that at the end of it, I would have a garden office that was fully insulated, fully heated, and that would have working Wi-Fi in it. And that would definitely happen. And he had pictures of it that he could show me from other people. Like he could evidence his work that he'd done from other people. He put me in touch with other people or whatever. And I knew that would be the outcome, right? PR people too often equivocate over what the outcome of their activity, what the outputs are going to be for a kickoff, actually. Like, are we even going to get you coverage? I mean, the pitch from a lot of PR agencies is, I can't guarantee you that we'll get you coverage, but I can guarantee you we'll be busy fools for the period of time that you employ us, right? And that's just bonkers. No one's ever bought anything. No one with a brain will spend money on someone saying, we're going to work really hard, and we hope that the outcome of that hard work is going to be something approximating of this, right? By actually committing to an outcome, actually, to be honest, outputs would be a good start. Just that we are going to deliver X number of media opportunities, or based on our experience, we know we will be able to deliver 100 leads from this activity, because we know if we don't get them with earned, we'll get them with paid. If we don't get them with paid, we'll get them with, shared. If we don't get, we will sweat this asset, right? One way or another, that's going to deliver you 100 leads. And do you know what? If all of those things fail, I'll pick up the phone and I'll phone your target audience myself, and I'll get them in that way, right? So I think it's that commitment to an output, which hopefully in our experience leads to an outcome, that I think too few PR people and PR agencies are willing to do. And we do our profession, and I called it a profession, a great disservice by not committing to that. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
I love it. And if you want part 2 of Darryl's soapbox, go back on Twitter a week or so, and there was a brilliant thread with large parts of that conversation featuring in it. And I think Darryl's right. And there speaks a man who has the drive to build a business, and that drive is what PR and comms professionals need, and that confidence and that focus. And I think that the issue we're talking about here comes down to confidence in PR and comms. We have to be confident that we are value creators and not just activity doers. We're not just pen pushers who hope. This is the fear that I see again and again. People, they fear that the work that they do can't really drive an outcome for an organization. There's too many opportunities for the dog to eat my homework between the work that I do and what actually happens. And you know what? Sometimes that's fair and sometimes that's right. But the relationship that a PR and comms pro needs with their client needs to be based on more confidence, more consultation in terms of to and fro. Because the only thing I would slightly, disagree with Darryl about is that it's okay to have a target, but the target, it may just be that for whatever reason you're not going to hit it. And he joked about he'd get on the phone himself, but even that might not work. So at that point it's the time to pick up the phone to the client, or you're working with the client, and you say, look, we need to change our strategy here. The point there then is that this all comes about it comes down to having the confidence to say upfront, we're going to have a credible, relevant, meaningful plan. And that plan is going to detail what it is that we're trying to achieve, what a success looks like, how are we going to know if we've got there or not, what are the measurements and the metrics that matter, what are the targets that we want to achieve. And at this point, when you bring measurement into the planning stage, you start thinking about measurement at the planning stage, all the fear that people have of it as this sort of scary number that appears at the end of their campaign and that they can't control, that actually disappears, because at this point it's a hope and an aspiration, and you can have a conversation one-on-one with your client that we think with this budget you've given, with my professional experience, we believe that we can deliver this for you. And the point about measurement and about targets, as we all know on this pod, is they should be smart. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And if your client or your boss is asking for stuff that isn't smart, you can push back at this point and say, this isn't reasonable, this isn't specific enough, this isn't possible with the budget I've got, this isn't time bound, whatever it might be. And you can have a sensible conversation, because in cricket parlance, you're not on the back foot. You're having a sensible one-to-one conversation, and they'll appreciate it and they'll respect us more if we have that confidence to do it. And that's the reason that when I was AMEC's chair, I got AMEC to launch all the resources that we did around how PR and comms pros can plan better and bring the measurement as part of plan. Those two things are completely symbiotic. So we need to have the confidence, we need to plan, we need to think about what it is we're trying to achieve. We don't have to guarantee them. We have to say, this is what we're aiming to do, and then just refine them as we progress towards them.
I think just quickly, Richard's been on podcasts with me previously, so he knows this already. I'm not revealing anything too personal, but every single member of the Hard Numbers team has the AMEC integrated evaluation framework tattooed on their body. I've got it tattooed on my inner thigh. And it's a resource that we use consistently across the business because it gives you an absolutely cast iron framework that starts with what is the objective here, and then takes you through what are the activities that we're going to do, what are the outputs that we're going to create, to ultimately what is the outcome that we're going to deliver for our client. And anyone doing anything, right, not just in marketing, communications or PR, should start with the integrated framework, because it's a brilliant model for just making you stop and go, right, why are we doing this? And what is it that we're trying to do? Where are we trying to get to, and how are we going to get there?
Yeah. We actually injected the planning resource into the framework as well to call it out further. The first version of the framework had planning in it, but it didn't have enough on it. So we created the planning resources, then injected them into the framework to pull that out even further. And no, I haven't seen Darryl's inner thigh. Certainly not up close and personal. But I do believe him.
Particular resource that you use on a regular basis. There should be more complaints coming from your team if it is. Seriously though, using those time-bound objectives and doing it up front with planning really does get those big headlines that we want. So the headlines like, we got you the Series B funding, or we took you to IPO, like they're the kind of headlines that really do our industry justice and gets the whole marketing world's attention. I interviewed an interesting PR woman called Donna Lachlan. She is the owner of a PR firm in San Francisco called LMG PR. And she's known in San Francisco to be the venture capitalists person that they try and get involved in all funding, because she is just known for taking companies to IPO through her PR pieces. It's like, that's really cool. That's really impressive. But that's all she focused on. And it was just those big profile pieces that she was doing, working with the leads of businesses. And the same with you guys, Hard Numbers. You are known for getting those hard numbers and actually getting to the business results. So I think there's lessons there that we can just, with measurement, but also just really be known for those big business shifts. Guys, we've been talking for longer than I had planned, but it's so interesting and we could talk all afternoon. But thank you so much for explaining more about the research. Where can people download, find the report and learn more?
Thank you so much. So if they go to hardnumbers.co.uk, we've got both the coverage to Captial reports on there. If they go to my Twitter page, which is at Darryl, DARRYL SPAREY, I think I have it as a pinned tweet as well. And if I don't, I'll make sure I do for when this goes out. So yeah, that's where they can get the report from.
Great. And Richard, if people wanted to do some in-depth analysis like you did in the report, how can they get in touch with you or CARMA?
Yeah, well, thanks, Stella. I mean, it's an area that we specialise in. With most recent AMEC Awards, we're helping the organisations on their measurement journey. We're helping them bring frameworks to life. So if there are any listeners who are interested in that, then you can find us at CARMA.com is our URL, and find me on Twitter and LinkedIn at Richard Bagnall on both of them. I look forward to speaking to anyone. And, as I've always said as well, I've been lucky to have been in this industry. The industry's been very kind to me, so I'm always happy to give back. So if anyone's just got a measurement challenge and just, wants a little bit of advice, they can reach out to me there as well, and I'll do my best to point them in the right direction.
Amazing offer there. Thank you very much. I can also feel that I really love to continue to talk about reputation management as well. If people want a follow-up podcast on that, then I think that could be a cool one. Great. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you both soon.